Reboot your credit card with Apple Card. It gives you unlimited daily cash back that can earn 4.35% annual percentage yield when you open a savings account. A high-yield, low-effort way to grow your money with no fees. Apply for Apple Card now in the Wallet app on iPhone to start earning and growing your daily cash with savings today. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, member FDIC. Terms apply.
Jewelry isn't a gift you give just once. It's a way to remind your loved one of a beautiful moment every time they see it. Blue Nile can help you find the gift that says how you feel and says it beautifully, with expert guidance and a wide assortment of jewelry of the highest quality at the best price. Go to BlueNile.com and experience the convenience of shopping Blue Nile, the original online jeweler since 1999. That's BlueNile.com to find the perfect jewelry gift for any occasion. BlueNile.com.
Hang up and listen, fans. People who are listening for the first time might hear a bad word or two. Hi, I'm Stefan Fatsis, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of January 9th, 2024. On this week's show, we'll sing Hail to the Victors and, we're not going to sing Hail to the Victors, but we will break down Michigan's 34-13 win over Washington for its first college football championship in more than 2 decades. Then, like Michigan coach Jim Harbaugh probably, we'll move on to the NFL, the upcoming playoffs, which coaches got fired on Black Monday, and why Bill Belichick wasn't one of them. Finally, Chantel Jennings of The Athletic will join us to discuss whether the NCAA's new media deal with ESPN continues to undervalue women's college basketball. I'm in Washington, D.C., and am the author of the books Wild and Outside, Word Freak, and A Few Seconds of Panic. Also in Washington, it's Josh Levin, the author of The Queen and the host of Slate's podcast series 1 Year. The latest edition is 1990, and it's terrific. There's even a mention of Scrabble in the fantastic episode Mandrake the Magician. Don't think I didn't notice, Josh.
Thanks for noticing, Stefan. And thank you for reading the intros with such aplomb. I'm recovering from COVID that I acquired in New Orleans. I'm trying to normalize, Joel, discussions of COVID transmission over the holiday season. I don't want to hide. I think you raised last week. What's the deal with nobody talking about COVID anymore?
Oh yeah, our timing was impeccable, right? I should have. Did you? Well, do you want to talk about if you wore a mask on the plane or not, or no?
I did not wear a mask on the plane.
Yeah, man. See, I mean, we've all, but I did the same thing. I don't know. I'm just kind of moving. We don't live in that world anymore. So let Josh's illness be an example to you all.
Well said.
Joel is in Palo Alto. It's in California. He's the 3-time host of Slate's podcast series Slow Burn, most recently becoming Justice Thomas. And congrats are in order, Joel, on your new column for Slate, Emotional Investment, which, and I'm quoting from the headline of the first piece, is about money and all the complicated feelings it brings up. I'm excited for this. Tell us about it.
Did it mention Scrabble, Stefan?
Yeah, we're going to get in and talk a little bit about, get Stefan to talk about, the financial commitment to pursuing Scrabble as a hobby. But yeah, man, we're really excited about it this year. I'm hoping for the column to have sort of like a life, there's going to be a start point and a finish point. And I want to tell a story of America and the way people live in this country and how money affects the way that they live and what they do and where they, all that sort of stuff. So it's still an evolving project. I have ideas, but I really do hope that people email us at emotionalinvestment@slate.com and, tell us their stories, offer up story ideas, things like that, because I think it could be something cool. I know nothing about money, so I hope you all would teach me about it. And I don't have a lot of money, and I hope some of you all would give some to me and maybe Slate Plus as well. So there's that opportunity as well.
Why did you not put your Cash App in the headline? That seems like a mistake.
I only use my Cash App to pay my barber, but I didn't think about all the other possible, all the other possibilities here.
The column is evolving, like you said.
Yeah, it's still a chance. I can put up my Venmo, my Cash App, my Zelle, and if you guys want to drop off a little something,
hold up your phone to the podcast right now, and you'll get a QR code to pay Joel.
One thing we'll also probably cover is scams and not giving your money to people on the internet as well, too. So. I can't wait, Joel. Before we start, I do have to thank you guys for all the support for my big live stream defeat of number 1 rated North American champ Josh Sokol at the big 23-game Scrabble tournament in Albany, New York over New Year's. Truth is, though, I was lucky to hang on and win that game after my 96-point opening bingo Koto.
Did you listen? Did you listen?
I'm going to talk myself down here, Joel. It's what I do. I played like ass. More deserving kudos go to my daughter, Chloe, who on the live stream put up a 616-point game with 6 bingos. They were Weldors, Weldors, Nortenos, Paraguas, Tentoria, Cervelat, Cervelat, and Diocese. It was truly insane.
Cervelat. Wait. I think there was a rapper, Mr. Cervelat. There was a rapper named Mr. Cervelat. That's not the word that she spelled.
Cervelat is a smoked sausage. Tentoria is the plural of tentorium, the internal skeleton of the head of an insect. Paragua is a dugout canoe. Norteno, an inhabitant of northern Mexico. And Weldor is an alternate spelling of welder. She's ridiculously good. I love her.
She's great, and she's gone right now. She dominated in Scrabble and then decamped for another country, correct?
A little semester abroad in Greece. Yeah, she didn't really dominate though. She finished 13-10. I finished 10-13. We both lost our last 4 games. Fatsis choking.
Y'all are the Eagles. Y'all are the Eagles of Scrabble.
It was not good, man. It was not good. Oh, Josh, one other thing before we move on. A correction. I told you I'd never beaten the current number 1 player. But I had beaten the current number 1 player in 2018, the late legend David Gibson. It's actually the pinned thread at the top of my Twitter account, so I don't remember anything. In our bonus segment for Slate Plus members, we'll discuss the bizarre play over the weekend in which the New Orleans Saints faked victory formation and ran up the score against the Atlanta Falcons. Hot takes galore coming. To hear that conversation, you have to be a Slate Plus member. As a member, you get bonus segments on this and other Slate shows, ad-free listening for all Slate podcasts, and you get to help make this show possible, for which, as we start the show's 16th calendar year, we started in 2009, we are very grateful. Slate.com/hangupplus to sign up. That's slate.com/hangupplus.
At 60 years old, Jim Harbaugh is still pretty shifty. Take, for instance, the final seconds of the national championship game in Houston, with his Michigan Wolverines finishing off a 34-13 win over Washington on Monday night. Harbaugh was on the sidelines basking in the victory and skipping away from the traditional Gatorade bath at the last moment. Here's a clip of that moment.
Oh, he got out of there.
He is uncanny at avoiding that.
Quick like a cat. Can't get me. Can't get me.
Still dry.
Got his arm a little bit.
Hey, it's a polarizing figure. There are people out there that believe that whatever Michigan does is tainted. That's up to you to decide. But hail, hail, Michigan. They are the champions of college football 2023.
Indeed, Harbaugh led his alma mater to their first national title in 26 years with an anticlimactic rout of the Huskies. From there, Harbaugh was about as exuberant as anyone has ever seen him. He went from hug to hug. He accepted the championship trophy. He said he'd live up to an earlier promise to get a 15-0 tattoo. And yes, he eventually got doused with Gatorade after another attempt later in the post-game celebration. You know, Josh, as soon as the game was over, many NFL insiders started speculating about Harbaugh's future. Some mentioned that he'd be the top candidate for the LA Chargers. Others connected him to openings with the Raiders or Commanders. In his post-game press conference, Harbaugh pleaded with reporters to give him the night. He said, "I just want to enjoy this. So, let's respect the man's wishes. Let's do it for now. Let's talk about the game, Josh. What will you remember about Harbaugh in his first and maybe last national championship season?"
Alex Kirshner, our pal, had a great piece in Slate that you can read today that does a good job of noting that Michigan is the first team in this era of the college football playoff to win the title without a dominant passing game. And the most fascinating thing about that is that they did it mostly by choice. There are a lot of things about this team that are a throwback, including that style of play, the focus on the Joel Anderson style running game, And the fact that in the age of the transfer portal, they won with continuity, with players like the game's offensive MVP, running back Blake Corum, who chose to come back and try to win a championship. The thing that was not a throwback is that Corum and players like offensive linemen Trevor Keegan and Zach Zenner were supported, meaning paid, by something called the One More Year Fund, which is a collective that pooled donations from whether it's big donors or fans to help induce Michigan's best players to stick around and try to win the game that they actually won. And also, Michigan has a coach, Jim Harbaugh, who, for everything else you might want to say about him, has argued more loudly than anyone else in his position for the players to get their cut. He said a couple days ago in the kind of preamble to this game that coaches like him and athletic directors and TV networks are all, and this is a quote, robbing the same train, which is a pretty evocative phrase. And so given the sign stealing scandal, given the general immorality of college sports and college football in particular, I'm not going to say there was something righteous about this victory. Is there something that we should hail about it? That's for you to decide. But there would have been a lot of things less righteous than this victory, Stefan, and it felt like an apt victory for a sport that's at a crossroads right now.
Yeah. I think it's not in spite of the cheating scandal, the sign stealing scandal, but maybe, because of the sign stealing scandal that we can look at this Michigan victory as something memorable, because it does kind of embody where we are in college sports. I mean, the finalists embodied where we are in college sports. Michigan, Big Ten stalwart, one of the most historic, oldest traditional programs in football. And Washington, who bailed from the Pac-12, sped up its demise, and will be moving to the Big Ten to illogically play Rutgers in a conference game going forward. And the thing, Joel, that you watch the end of this game and you wonder is like, oh, is the NCAA going to go all NCAA and in 5 years strip Michigan's championship? But who would care at this point? I mean, is there anything that gives the NCAA a weight of any authority in these matters? Everyone saw what happened on the field. Everyone saw Michigan win those two games in different but equally impressive ways, Alabama and Washington. That was a great football team that played two really interesting football games in the playoff and deserved to be the champion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the NCAA has even the purview to strip their title because the CFP is different, right? I guess they could vacate a lot of the wins that happened before the championship games, the semifinal and championship, and maybe they could do something that way. But I don't know. I can't imagine they would do that now. But I mean, that punishment still is yet to come. They're still apparently looking into it. So I guess anything is possible. But I think to your point, it's too late, right? Everybody has seen Michigan win post Connor Stallion scandal. They saw the manner in which they won. They've had an opportunity to celebrate in front of the nation and the world. Stripping it at this point really serves no purpose. And if anything, you got to figure that the punishment would be more likely to be levied at Jim Harbaugh, which, okay, we've seen if he misses a few games, if he's not on the sideline, it doesn't really make that much of a difference, right? But, I was actually thinking in the wake of this last night, I hope Michigan fans give some credit to TCU for encouraging them to reach heights that their football program hadn't reached in a generation. I mean, the only team that's beaten Michigan in the last 2 years.
In the J.J. McCarthy era.
In the J.J. McCarthy era is TCU. And I don't think it's a stretch. And I mean, I'm sort of joking, but I'm not. I don't think it's a stretch to say that this championship effectively started at last year's Fiesta Bowl, where McCarthy and the rest of the Wolverines got to watch the Frogs celebrate, and go on to be that year's sacrifice at the altar of Georgia. And I actually think this is important for a couple of reasons, because I think if Michigan plays in that championship game against Georgia last year and gets beat down in the way that I think they would have gotten beat down, maybe not as bad as TCU, but I think they would have taken a hellacious ass beating. I think it could have affected them in their approach to the 2023 season. It's sort of hard to shake the sort of psychological damage that I think Georgia inflicted on TCU. And I wonder if it would have changed the minds of the players who decided to return. And, Josh made a point about that One More Year Fund. and, luring back like the Blake Corums, the Zach Zenters, the Michael Barretts, and other key contributors. And it got me thinking about this. And, Alex wrote about how this team is sort of a throwback. And in a time of so much flux and transactional relationships in college football, Blake Corum and his teammates committed to the program and decided that what they wanted was more than passing through on the way to the NFL. And we can question the wisdom of those decisions at a later date, especially Zenter, who was lost for the year in that win over Ohio State, right? That's going to clearly affect his NFL draft stock. But the one thing that became clear to me in that post-game celebration, there's nothing like becoming a legend at your alma mater. Being someone where the people know you and know what you did for them in their institution. And that even goes back to Harbaugh, whose championship at Ann Arbor is going to long outlive whatever he does in the NFL again, if he does decide to go to the NFL.
One thing that I found was a pretty big omission in the broadcast. I mean, Herbstreit and Fowler, I think, were their usual really good selves. They called a good game. But the biggest storylines in that game on the Washington side were the running back Dylan Johnson playing through a foot injury, and then, as they detailed in the broadcast, seemingly injuries to every other part of his body. And then Michael Penix taking an enormous beating from the Michigan defensive line, mostly, and just clearly wincing in pain during the game, after the game, seemingly having some issue with his midsection from the repeated hits he was taking. And this is in contrast to the bowl season, where we saw this year and in years past players sitting out due not to injury, but due to fear of injury, which is a completely rational set of behaviors and moves. And in this game, you saw what it meant to these players. You saw that a guy like Dylan Johnson would play through not fear of injury, but actual injury, that Michael Penix would play through actual injury, that probably, dozens of players on both teams were playing through actual injury. And Stefan, I don't think we can talk about the immorality of this in the same way that we could in the pre-NIL era. And so I'm kind of playing off what Joel said. Like, there is something to be said, whether it's in pro sports or college sports, to what a championship means to, we can all relate to that, whether you've played for a championship on any level. There's something rational about playing through injury to try to win something that'll stick with you for the rest of your life. But it did feel like an omission in the broadcast not to talk about, should these guys be playing? Is it, obviously we're going to talk about how tough they are and like how brave they are for doing this. But it felt like, especially even in this era in college sports, that it wasn't even floated. Like, why are these guys playing in this game? That just felt to me like a something that should have been aired.
Well, what should have been aired but couldn't possibly be aired is the fact that they played 15 games, and then next year the two finalists will probably have played 17 games. Joel, you played college football. You know what the toll is here. You know that these are not professional athletes. You know that the level of ability varies widely within teams and from game to game. You know that they are not conditioned or even mature physically in the ways that grown-ass men of 26 and 28 and 30 are. That's a conversation that probably needs to be had. What are they going to do to ensure that whoever is playing in next year's final isn't depleted in the way that clearly Washington was? If this was a semifinal game, those two guys might not or should not have been allowed to play in the final based on their physical condition and what we saw on the field.
I was actually talking about that last night, about the idea that when they expand the playoff to 12 teams, that, whoever wins, whoever makes it is going to play, 16, 17 games, right? And that's unconscionable for college football players. Now, of course, they're getting NIL payments, that sort of thing, and that's all well and good, but there's a whole big, huge pot of money out there in terms of the TV deals that they're still not able to avail themselves of. And I think that having a postseason Like we've spent a lot of time like fretting about, oh, we've got to have a postseason, we've got to expand access to more teams, and not thinking about what it means for the players that are going to have to put their bodies on the line. Like, I mean, you could see that Michigan's physicality clearly took a toll in Washington, and playing two games in the spotlight against two other elite programs, what it can do to a team. Like I was against Dylan Johnson playing last night, but then when Washington subbed in its backup running back and the guy dropped a swing pass out of the backfield on 4th down, I was like, oh, I kind of understand why they're, running this guy out there who's running with a limp. As much as like, we all want to see college football and, want more teams invited to the dance and, all these other programs having some access to it. I still think that is the part of it that I'm going to have a problem with, is that, not only are these players sort of risking life and limb to be out there, they're not even getting a cut of the TV revenue. And so I hope that that's something that, people are as excited about rectifying as they are the idea that a school like Florida State doesn't get an opportunity to play in this playoff. Because to me, that's the much more important issue here, I think, Josh.
If we're going to really kind of hone in on our own delusions and biases, you put on your purple glasses, I can put on my purple and gold glasses. And I'm only being slightly facetious here when I talk about this. You've kind of been joking with me or mocking with me about the Heisman and Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix and who really deserves it. But, one of the big plays in this game, and this was a game, we've just been focusing on how much Michigan dominated it. There was a long stretch of that game where it seemed like Washington had figured out Michigan improbably, that after these two really long runs by Donovan Edwards, they were just shutting everything down. It was kind of turned into a punt fest. There were drops on both sides. And there was, this long period where Washington had the ball multiple times with a chance to tie the game or take the lead if they went for two. But I think one of the big plays of the game was J.J. McCarthy scrambling on a 3rd down deep in Michigan's territory and running for a 1st down. And whether it's college or whether it's the NFL, a running quarterback it feels like cheating a lot of the times. Like LSU converted 60% almost of its 3rd downs this year, because anytime everything broke down, Jaden Daniels would just run away and get a 1st down. I mean, Lamar Jackson's going to be MVP of the NFL, not just because he can run everywhere, because he can run to throw. But I think what we saw in this game is that Michael Penix is an unbelievable quarterback when he has the structure around him to succeed. In this game, Michigan was getting home with 4. He was getting pounded, and those beautiful on-target back shoulder throws, he had Rome Odunze wide open on a 4th down, and they didn't quite connect. It was just kind of a click off, and he, for all of his ability, he doesn't run for 1st downs. When Washington just kept getting in 3rd downs and kept coming up short, he's not that kind of quarterback. And so he got them, it's not an attempt to criticize him, he got them all this way, but it just seemed like Washington needed somebody, in a game where they were clearly overmatched. The only way they could have possibly won is if they had Jaden Daniels. That's all I'm saying.
No, see, this is where I think that there you go. No, but I really think this is the issue where Dylan Johnson was hurt, because you need some.
They didn't have the running threat.
They didn't have their running threat. They didn't have their guy who is, or a fully healthy version of a guy that helps him pass pro. They also didn't have him as somebody that could relieve some of that pressure by catching passes out of the backfield, right? Like some dump offs, some things that would, maybe ease up that pressure, that pass pressure that Penix was facing. But, and we
another
can talk
good counter
about
argument is look what Michigan did to Jalen Milroe.
That's fair point. That's fair point. But here's the thing, and I'm going to give Michigan his props here, because consider that Washington trailed by only a score at 20-13 after a field goal about 3 minutes into the 3rd quarter. Here's how their next 3 drives went: 5 plays, 11 yards; 5 plays, 18 yards; 3 plays, 1 yard. And then Michigan took that next possession and scored on Corum's 12-yard run that gave Michigan a 2-score lead, and that was pretty much all she wrote. So, and Stefan, I wonder if people will think about this. So I wonder if people are going to look back and realize that maybe this Michigan team might be one of the greats. They're only one of 3 teams.
I feel like you say that every year.
Well, the only one. I'm going to give you some data. There are only 3 teams that have ever gone 15-0 in college football history: 2018 Clemson, 2019 LSU, and 2023 Michigan.
Oh, wait, that's false. That's false. Yale, Penn in like 1894 and 1896 or something. So.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I forgot. I'm sure they beat Rutgers along the way, just like Michigan, I'm sure. So that probably helped. And of course, you all will point to the weak non-conference schedule, the sort of below average Big Ten slate or whatever, and them getting the weakest Alabama team in 15 years on the way. But one of the things that teams never get credit for is defense, and Michigan might have one of the best in recent memory. They only allowed 10.4 points a game this season, and that's the best Big Ten team since 1997, when Michigan allowed 9.5 points a game.
The last 3 games were against top 4 teams in the country: Ohio State, Alabama, Washington.
Yeah, man, and they're the only national champion since Miami 2001 that didn't trail at halftime in any game this season. So, I mean, man, when you look back at this record, I just kind of wonder if people are going to be like, you know what? That team was pretty damn great, and we didn't recognize it at the time.
My last thought at kind of the end of the 4-team playoff era, we can look back at it now. And when we look back at it in 5 or 10 years, I think it'll just be absolutely remarkable in retrospect how much the SEC, Clemson, and Ohio State just completely dominated this era of college football. And Ben Mathias-Lilley, congratulations, Ben, was asking us last week, like kind of how we explain how Michigan and Washington kind of broke through this year. And I think it's just really surprising. I don't think any of us would have predicted that NIL, and maybe the portal is a little bit more predictable, but just really flattened the sport in a way that I think is good for competitive reasons. I mean, we'll see what happens with the Big Ten and the SEC being the only conferences that matter now, that could like render a lot of this moot. But if you look at recruiting, it's like it's a lot more flat. Like the 5-star players are getting spread out more evenly. A team like Washington that has like no in-state recruiting base at all is able to, by getting Michael Penix out of the transfer portal, by having a great coach, by getting talent from California, I'm sure, but they're able to compete at a level that would have seemed kind of implausible. I mean, they made the playoff once before, but they weren't really a serious championship contender. And so it's just funny that in this era that was so defined and so dominated by this particular set of teams, we're kind of coming out of it in a really different time for the sport.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess, the one thing, and I hope Michigan fans give me credit for this, is that I advocated you guys keeping Jim Harbaugh the whole damn time. Like, even when it looked really dark, even when, you guys wanted him gone after the COVID year.
You should get a little mini banner to put up in your room behind you.
I really should. So, when I was a teenager, somebody stole my Michigan coat out of my locker room. So, maybe somebody want to send that to me or something.
Or send you a few nickels from the One More Year Fund.
I mean, look,
we already know that your Venmo is going to be up on screen soon.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities to contribute to me here. So I hope Michigan fans take that opportunity. But bottom line, Jim Harbaugh is one of the best coaches of my lifetime. And I hope he stays in college football, because I think that's where he's most likely to be the character he is and to matter in the way that he does. And if he stays, maybe Michigan inserts himself up into that, that class where we talk about Alabama and Georgia, because I think he's just that good, and I think he can make Michigan just that good. In the next segment, will the Patriots fire Bill Belichick?
At the grocery store, you can get pecans. But don't you want bourbon pecans, sweet and spicy pecans, pecan brittle, or butter toffee pecans? If you're eager to try these, head to nuts.com to see the hundreds of different varieties of nuts they offer. Those bourbon pecans, I can tell you, are quite delicious. Nuts.com is your one-stop shop for all of those different kinds of pecans, bourbon and otherwise, freshly roasted nuts, dried fruit, sweets, pantry staples like specialty flours, and more. Their wide selection means there's something for everyone, and Nuts.com quality is a top priority. They roast their nuts and pop their corn the same day it ships, so they reach you deliciously fresh, and satisfaction is guaranteed. Right now, Nuts.com is offering new customers a free gift with purchase and free shipping on orders of $29 or more at Nuts.com/hangup. So go check out all of the delicious options at Nuts.com/hangup. You'll receive a free gift and free shipping when you spend $29 or more. That's Nuts.com/hangup. If you like using debit over credit, Discover Cashback Debit is definitely a game changer. It's a checking account that rewards everyone with cash back on everyday purchases, which means you can get cash back on tickets for the game, snacks, team merch, all with no fees, making this season a total win. Check out eligibility and terms at discover.com/cashbackdebit. Discover Bank, member FDIC.
To no one's surprise, the NFL's annual firing spree, known as Black Monday, lived up to its reputation. As expected, the Washington Commanders parted ways with Ron Rivera, and the Atlanta Falcons fired Arthur Smith. But there's one more potential move on the horizon that would have seemed totally improbable, even 2 years ago. Bill Belichick is believed to be on the hot seat after a 4-13 season in New England, his worst in 29 seasons as a head coach. In his regular season-ending video conference, Belichick broke from his long-standing rule about not discussing his contract. Here's a clip.
I'm going to do everything I can every day to do the best I can to help our football team. That's what I've always done. It's never been any different for me in my career. I learned that lesson from my dad growing up. You work for the team that you're working for and do the best you can for them until somebody tells you different.
The Boston Globe published a story Monday about Belichick's situation with this headline: Bill Belichick is practically begging to keep his job with the Patriots. Stefan, there's a lot happening around the league that we'll get to. The playoffs start this weekend, and defending NFC champion Philadelphia seems to be falling apart ahead of the postseason. But first, what should the Patriots do with Belichick?
The relationship, Joel, between Belichick and Patriots owner Robert Kraft has always been portrayed as, and probably is, a sort of supra-transactional thing, right? A lifetime bond, which is understandable. 17 division titles, 9 AFC conference titles, 6 Super Bowl wins. Belichick is just 15 games short of the all-time NFL record for wins for a coach. He will carry Kraft to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And yet here's Belichick reduced to not just talking at length about himself in a news conference, which he doesn't do, but pretty much groveling for his job. He openly said that he'd be willing to give up responsibility for personnel to keep his job. What he said was smart and self-aware, seemingly, but also kind of sad. So on the one hand, because of that history, it's impossible to see this becoming a traditional firing. On the other hand, even legendary coach-owner relationships can end with an abrupt pink slip. Denver Broncos owner Pat Bowlen and his 2-time Super Bowl winning coach Mike Shanahan were pals and viewed as inseparable, but Bowlen canned him after a couple of bad seasons. I'd be shocked, though, if Belichick is straight up fired. He wants to keep coaching. He seems willing to do less internally. And while you might see him as a coach anywhere robot, when you're 72 and grumpy, the idea of starting over in Atlanta or Charlotte can't be that appealing. So it's either graceful negotiated exit prompted by Kraft or a rapprochement and job redefinition and back to the grind.
I think graceful negotiated exit was what everybody thought was going to happen. I mean, when we had Aaron Schatz on the show months ago, that's what he predicted. I think we were all expecting that. And the thing that's most surprising to me is the fact that they did have months to figure out what was going to happen on Monday. This was not a situation that changed in any material way over the last couple of months. They were bad all season. They had quarterback problems all season. They, I think, scored the fewest points in the NFL, tied with the Panthers, a Panthers team that scored a combined 0 points in the last 2 weeks. And so, yeah, it got really bad. But this is an organization that has prided itself on its professionalism, on not only kind of doing things the right way, but being kind of cold and dispassionate when the time comes to make a move that everyone knows is the right one to make. And so I thought he was going to be gone. I think over the weekend, Joel, it seemed like all the NFL insiders thought he was going to be gone. But no matter what the decision was, whether they decided to keep him or let him go, I just find it so weird. And maybe there's something that I'm missing here, that it seems unresolved and Belichick was like publicly pleading for his job. It just seems kind of so unnecessary and strange given the long relationship here. You know, he's obviously one of the greatest coaches of all time, but, you know, it's not like Arthur Smith got fired by the Falcons like 2 minutes after midnight. I mean, there was time to figure this out.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe a function of not wanting to do the hard thing, right? Like, I'm sure that is very difficult, trying to decide where to go here. Maybe they were waiting to see how the year might end, if there was some sort of glimmer of hope. I think there's also—
I just find that impossible to believe. There was no glimmer of hope.
There's no glimmer of hope for the team, but it's possible that Belichick, maybe Kraft was just waiting for Belichick to come to some sort of decision. Maybe they did talk during the year and we just don't know.
Or maybe Kraft thought that Belichick would quote unquote do the right thing or like make it easy for him.
So, I mean, I think there's a couple of pieces of that. One, like, again, you know, Bill Belichick, they probably thought maybe he might decide to retire on his own. Or maybe they thought there might be a glimmer, you know, some sort of spark at the end of the year that they could say, okay, we can live with this. And consider, I mean, the Patriots still had a top 10 defense. They had one of the league's best defenses. And that's even after losing Matthew Judon earlier in the year, one of their best players. That's Belichick's expertise. And so that side of the ball is still great. So they could say, well, hey, look, we still have a really championship caliber defense. Maybe we get him to, you know, make some concessions in terms of personnel. We get a new quarterback in here. Maybe it's a veteran, maybe whatever. And
we get a new offensive coordinator, and they've already floated Josh McDaniels returning, whom Kraft likes and Belichick likes. And they've worked together for like 19 years, even if the rest of the world hates him.
Getting the whole gang back together. You know what I'm saying?
That's been what Belichick has done, and what's gotten them in this position is recycling the Bill O'Briens and the Matt Patricias when they're, I mean, we're just inundated with the big storyline in the NFL the past decade is like, look at all these young offensive geniuses that are popping up everywhere. I mean, the big story in coaching circles this offseason is the Lions offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, like asking for $15 million to be a head coach somewhere. I mean, and the idea that the best you can do is Josh McDaniels and Matt Patricia and the Bill O'Briens of the world. I mean, that to me is a fireable offense. And their drafts have been horrible. And so there is an obvious thing that you could do here. Take away all personnel responsibilities from Belichick and bring in somebody who could run the offense and draft a new quarterback at the top of the draft and like take that over from him. But like, what's the point of Bill Belichick? Is he just the defensive coordinator at that point?
Right. Can he return under those circumstances too? Like after he's been stripped of that sort of responsibility?
Why not just start fresh?
Oh, I think he could. Right. There is the why not just start fresh, but that's going to be part of, that's a Robert Kraft ego thing too. I mean, I think he's invested in his relationship with Belichick. And I don't know that Kraft has the same sort of, could have the same sort of response that Pat Bowlen, whom I mentioned, had with Shanahan. I think these guys are so deeply connected that, barring each of them agreeing that it is time, and Belichick may be agreeing that it's just time to retire, that making that sort of full break will feel difficult for Kraft, who is so invested in the Patriots way and the Belichick way, that moving on from it can't be easy.
I think it's the exact opposite. I think it's just like how Brady and Belichick and Kraft, when you, again, look forward 5 or 10 years, everybody's going to remember the Patriots years. They're going to be intertwined forever. But Brady got the ultimate fuck you with the Bucks championship. Don't you think that Kraft can love and respect Belichick and all they accomplished together and still have the massive ego that all NFL owners have? You said that he's going to ride into Canton on Belichick's coattails. Wouldn't he want to get one more Super Bowl with an entirely new structure, new quarterback, and new coach to prove that he, whether it's true or not, that he's like a brilliant architect?
No, because don't you think that the odds are, the way NFL hirings go, is that you're probably not going to get a good coach? You know what I mean? Like,
but Joel, that's not the point. The point is that he thinks that he's smart enough. Which owner? Do you think Jerry Jones? Do you think Jerry Jones is thinking, "Oh yeah, the odds probably aren't good if the Cowboys lose in their first playoff game? Oh, the odds probably aren't good. I'm just going to stick. I couldn't possibly pick someone better. I'm not that smart."
But Jerry Jones doesn't have a record of success. Like Bob Kraft is actually giving up something.
Jerry Jones won a few Super Bowls in his day, Joel.
No, that's true. But I'm just saying, like, Jerry Jones hasn't won. They haven't been to an NFC Championship game in like the lives of college students that are existing today. You know what I mean? Like Jerry Jones's confidence in his own ability is probably what Bob Kraft looks at and says, well, look, I've got a football guy here. I've got possibly the greatest NFL coach in history. Why would I give that up? Who am I going to get that assures me that we'll get right back to contention? We may just end up looking stupid.
I agree with that, Joel, because I think Jerry Jones looks at the Cowboys and thinks I'm smarter than everybody, and Robert Kraft looks at Bill Belichick and thinks he's smarter than everybody. I don't think Kraft's ego is like Jones's in that he thinks he can become the general manager of the Patriots and they'll do better. But I'm sure he is looking at Belichick, because he's not dumb, and saying he can't be my general manager anymore. This is now a failure without Tom Brady. His flaws have been exposed, and everybody is talking about how we haven't signed a draft picks from the first 3 rounds since 2013. That's a bad track record. That is on Belichick. Kraft isn't stupid, and he has people telling him those things, but he may be looking for that negotiated solution that would keep him in a reduced capacity and sort of save face about the tradition and the history and what they've built together.
I mean, what makes the sport so fascinating is that we don't know, for instance, how C.J. Stroud would have done on the Patriots this year, or how C.J. Stroud even would have done on the Panthers, where Bryce Young just looked like garbage all season. And so I think Robert Kraft is not an idiot. Like, if you're bringing in a new quarterback, if you're kind of resetting the franchise in that way, and you see the trends in the league, and you see what the Patriots offense has been like under Bill Belichick and his, conveyor belt of retreads, it just seems like folly to start a new era in one sense and just lean into the past another one. And like you mentioned, the Commanders and the Raiders and stuff, but what if the Cowboys lose to the Packers this coming weekend? Like, doesn't that feel like Jim Harbaugh come on down? I mean, he's the new Barry Switzer, the new Jimmy Johnson. I mean, that would just be perfect.
Well, no, I don't want Jim Harbaugh.
I don't either, but it just seems like that would be the version of this that would be the most entertaining. The variance of that would be pretty amazing of what the possible outcomes could be.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, you got to think that the Cowboys eventually at some point, they got to be like, all right, like we've done they've been a very good team for the last three years under McCarthy, but it's time for actually something to happen, right? And they can't, it's always that sort of thing. It's like, I actually believe if you've got a good team and you should just hold on to it for as long as possible, that eventually that you're going to make a breakthrough. But I don't know if Jerry Jones feels that way. Like, Jerry Jones might be like, well, it's time to go ahead and get that new shiny candidate out there. And Jim Harbaugh is like sort of in keeping with the Cowboy ethos that we get stars. Like, we're a star franchise and we'll bring a star in.
Jason Garrett. Say no more.
I lived in Dallas when Dave Campo was the head coach there. So, but I do think though that, that Jerry Jones is like, hey, we've got like, this is sort of our window. We should capitalize. Maybe we should do it and bring in a guy that can do it. But it helps. And it helps, Stefan, that your Philadelphia Eagles, not
my Eagles.
Those aren't your Eagles?
No, I'm a Giants fan. Go ahead.
Really? I always get your teams mixed up. Like, what is with your allegiances?
Just go with New York.
Man?
There's nothing else.
New York and Penn basketball.
And Penn basketball.
But it does seem like the Eagles have a lot at stake here. They've gone from being the darling of the league last season and in the first 11 games this year to, I saw a story this morning in the Enquirer about the real possibility that Nick Sirianni, the head coach, is going to get fired.
Yeah.
If they lose
this year,
if they lose this first game to the Bucs. I mean, this is the game.
Come on, man.
This opening weekend that I think the stakes are the highest. And Stefan, I think everybody is trying, including the Eagles themselves, are trying to figure out what the hell is going on with this team. There have been issues with the defense. I think that the 10-1 record kind of masks they're winning a lot of close games. But it seems like the offense as well has fallen apart. There are a bunch of injuries in this last game when they're just absolutely destroyed by Stefan's Giants. Jalen Hurts hurt his finger, which isn't a good thing for a quarterback. I mean, do you have any analysis of what's going on here, or more just kind of befuddlement?
Mostly befuddlement. I mean, the defense has been terrible. I mean, they got blown out back-to-back by the 49ers and the Cowboys in December. And it hasn't gotten better since.
Lost to the Cardinals.
Lost to the Cardinals. That last game against the Giants, they threw in the towel. Devonta Smith is hurt. It looks like A.J. Brown got hurt. I mean, it doesn't look like it. He did get hurt. Jalen Hurts hurt his finger in a weird collision. So this looks pretty desperate, but it does feel like this is a defense that had like 70 sacks last year and has barely half as many this year, 40-something. They switched and brought in, you mentioned Matt Patricia. I mean, Matt Patricia
always comes back to Matt Patricia.
Always come back to Matt Patricia. He has been, one story I was reading said, a disaster. They've had no big plays on the offense. They can't stop the run. This has not been a good team down the stretch. And it does seem like, at least from people in Philly are writing, is that Sirianni hasn't been able to get the team past these questions about itself.
One of the things that I heard throughout the year is even when the Eagles were 10-1, they sat their game. We're not playing well. Like we got to play better. We got to do this. And so it seems like they've been kind of hinting to everybody that we're not reaching our full potential. And in a way, that is an indictment of Nick Sirianni. But I just can't imagine the year after you were in a championship and qualified for the playoffs, right? And, you're a game out of winning your division and firing the dude. Like, it seems like you do at least have to try to run it back next year. The issue that I think that maybe Eagles fans haven't grappled with is that maybe last year and even early this year, you won a lot of close games. You played a little bit above your head, and like that things are turning in the opposite direction now. Like, I like Jalen Hurts. I think he is a very good NFL quarterback. Do I think that he is worth what he got paid? Well, I guess, somebody paid him that. He's worth it, but I'm a little skeptical of like how good he actually is when somebody's not pushing him in the ass forward. So I just wonder if like maybe those chickens are coming home to roost, and they may not be as bad as they are now, but they probably weren't as good as they were earlier in the year. And so things are leveling out now, I think.
It's similar to the Jaguars, who got off to a hot start and then not quite as hot a start. And then when they belly flopped, they actually missed the playoffs. And back to our point about assistants, one other theory is that Shane Steichen was the real brains of the operation, the OC, who's now the head coach of the Colts. But I think, the tush push is just such a brilliant maneuver and such a successful one. It seems like if you can make every third and fourth and short, that gives you like a 3 to 6 point edge in every game. And they are a team that's very analytically savvy, always kind of doing the right things around the margins. They have these great skill position guys. They have a center in Jason Kelsey, who's a really great, maybe Hall of Fame type player. It seems like they should and can figure it out. And yet, because of the NFL's rules, they have to go on the road to Tampa to face a pretty good defense. And so, we'll see what Jalen Hurts does with the likes of Antoine Winfield and Devin White and all those guys.
I think Bomani said it best about the Eagles. He's like, they look like a team that would skip a bowl game. Like if this was college football, that they would be their team, or how like teams sometimes will just, they'll refuse their NIT invitation. It's like this, that's the Eagles. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost in Tampa at all. In the next segment, we talk with Chantel Jennings of The Athletic to talk about the NCAA's new TV deal and what it means for the women's basketball tournament.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity. Much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save, too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the home gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
Last spring, South Carolina women's basketball coach Dawn Staley said it was time for the NCAA to negotiate a separate television contract for her booming sport. There's proof in the numbers, Staley said. Indeed, LSU's championship final victory over Iowa drew an audience of almost 10 million people, twice as many as the year before. But the NCAA didn't do it. Instead, last week, it announced an 8-year, $920 million agreement with ESPN to televise 40 sports that aren't men's college basketball, including women's college basketball. Chantel Jennings covers women's college basketball for The Athletic and is here now. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Chantel, the annual value of the deal is a big jump, more than 3 times as much as the current one. Women's basketball is the centerpiece. It's valued at $65 million a year of the $115 million a year total. So why does it feel like the NCAA still isn't giving women's basketball a chance to prove its value?
I think it's everything with women's college basketball, especially since the 2021 bubble season, is going to be put in contrast against what the men have and what the men are able to do. And so I think this idea that the men have been able to sort of grow this product by being on their own, by proving their worth, obviously that's what the women's coaches and the women's players have wanted to do as well. And so I think, no matter sort of how much women's basketball would have been valued in this deal, I think it could have been valued at $100 million within this deal. And I still think privately, coaches would have been saying, this is a disappointment because we haven't been able to go out on our own, even though, it is a tenfold increase from what they were valued in the previous deal, which was $6 to $7 million of that $34 million 29 championship deal with ESPN. But I think, and the NCAA knew this, if the women's tournament wasn't put on its own, there was going to be a disappointment no matter how much the tournament netted.
So, Chantel, people that have followed sports media in the last few years know that, there's been a winnowing, right? That there's not as many competitors in that space as there were. And then the competitors that have emerged, there's no track record, like for streaming services, right? Like people don't know. So is that a part of it? That it was just like, well, in ESPN, we have a sure thing, a partner that we've worked with before, and we don't know what the future is or who these other people might be that would emerge as potential competitors to strike a deal with them.
Yeah, I do think, if you take a step back and sort of look at this objectively, there would have been a huge risk to take this tournament property elsewhere. The women's tournament does home sites the first weekend. And so that first weekend alone, the women's tournament is at 16 different places. And if you just think about what that takes in terms of on-camera talent, off-camera talent, a headquarters that knows how to coordinate that, potentially 8 different games happening at once. This is a massive property, especially that first weekend. And if Charlie Baker were to hand that off to a property that has never done that before and just sort of say, well, hopefully this is worth the money. What if there were misses? What if they botched some of that? Then it's suddenly like, Charlie Baker is such an idiot for doing this, like, so I think either way you sort of look at it and it's like there was a huge risk with going elsewhere. But I think also what the NCAA had to consider is that ESPN is also the most consistent regular season partner. And so throughout the season, they are constantly sort of talking about the tournament, talking about Selection Sunday or Monday, talking about, getting to March and building up to that. If ESPN lost the tournament, suddenly you're with a new partner and you're with a regular season partner that's probably not going to, give all this time and effort to saying, turn on Amazon Prime or Apple TV Plus in March. And so not only is it a new property, but then it would have also been a property that wasn't getting that built-in sort of advertising.
We saw what can happen. The Pac-12 ceased to exist when it went chasing after those deals, and the member schools were waiting, and the commissioner was like, oh, maybe Apple, maybe whoever. And then by the time they had a deal on the table, they had all gone, the conference had ceased to exist. And so it's an interesting kind of conundrum in capitalism, in society, when you've got these two facts. You've got the 9.9 million people that watched the title game on ABC, and then you've got the fact that it was on ABC. It's like, would 9.9 million people have watched it if it was on Amazon, if it was on Apple, or if it was even on one of those networks? And Chantel, you made a great point, that hadn't promoted it and didn't have the infrastructure to do so. And so, yeah, you can make the argument that this is a sport on the come up, that the trajectory is just like crazy, but where else could they have gone? And so when you have this entity, ESPN, that's clearly the best partner, that in some ways, and tell me if this is right, is bidding against itself, it just seems really hard to value what this sport is worth in terms of TV rights.
Yeah, and you really mentioned something important in terms of the game being put on ABC. That is a part of the contract moving forward, that the title game will be on ABC every year through this 8-year deal, in addition to the women's gymnastics championships, women's volleyball championships, and the FCS football championship game. So there are good aspects to this deal. And talking with ESPN, they said, every year it'll be open to conversation if the Final Four games can also be on ABC, which would be, again, anytime you can put something on a TV channel that is easy to get, people will watch it. And so as much as sort of the storylines and the characters and the incredible play led to that 9.9 million last year, we also need to acknowledge the fact that when something is easy to get, more people are likely to watch it. And so having that agreement that, the title game at least will be on ABC is huge for women's basketball.
You wrote a column breaking all of this down, and you made some really smart points. And one is that there's a way for the NCAA to sort of wiggle out of some of this criticism, and that is by creating different kinds of enhancements that would go directly to women's basketball. One of them is structuring the payouts for the tournament like the men's tournament, where the participating conferences or the schools from the participating conferences get units that are then distributed to the conferences. And another is to create new types of sponsorship that wouldn't conflict with the men and would attract new companies. Can you break down sort of how that would work and how great the pressure is to enhance this deal to help the sport specifically?
I think the units specifically, because it's sort of the easier piece to understand and it's more obvious because you see the men's tournament get this payout every single year. That is sort of the new talking point as I talk with coaches. The ink is dry on this contract. They're going with ESPN for the next 8 years. 5 years from now, we'll sort of have another build up to what happens in 2032. But I think right now, a lot of coaches have turned their focus to the units, which would, the men's side last year, every win and every team that appeared in the tournament brought in $2 million to their conference. And so the SEC men brought in $34 million to the SEC last year, despite not having a team in the Elite Eight, versus South Carolina and LSU being in the Final Four on the women's side. LSU winning it brought in a goose egg to the SEC. And so when you have those unit payouts, it incentivizes conferences and programs to invest, because if you're looking at the success of a team in terms of what is that going to bring us beyond sort of the recognition on TV and social media and all of that, if there's a big $sign attached to it, a lot of athletic directors and commissioners are going to say, hey, let's make sure that these conference teams not only make the tournament, but can progress. I think the other side of that, which is a little more in the weeds, but I think is sort of the most obvious and important way to increase revenue for not only women's basketball, but every sport within these 40 championships, is creating this third tier of partnerships. As it sits right now, CBS and Turner Sports, within their last agreement for the men's basketball tournament, negotiated that they would have total negotiating power with all of the championships partners. And so they broadcast exactly one partner, but they negotiate for lacrosse, women's soccer, men's soccer, even though they have no vested interest in that. And when a company has no vested interest in that, how much does CBS really care about companies that want to invest in men's gymnastics? Exactly 0%. And so if Charlie Baker and the NCAA can kind of establish this third tier that hasn't existed before, that would allow smaller companies and smaller brands to connect themselves to those individual championships at a lower dollar figure, that would be direct revenue stream for those sports in the NCAA. And again, it's money is what speaks in college sports. We all know that. And so the more money that women's basketball brings in, whether it's through the media rights deal or these individual revenue streams, the more the sport is going to grow and the more the NCAA is going to respect it.
And Chantel, I was sort of wondering that is there some sense that actually women's hoops is so valuable that they had to tie it to these other NCAA championships? Because without women's basketball, like, where would those other championships go? Who would broadcast them? Like, that it seems that they're trying to use women's college basketball to lift the tides of all these other, non-revenue sports or whatever, so that they have their place on linear TV. Is that something that you heard? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I think it's, again, one of those things where when you talk to coaches, women's coaches, they're like, but why do we have to be the sport that carries everyone else? Why can't, men's basketball loop them in and make them carry every other sport? And maybe we'll see that. The men's deal and the women's deal are both up in 2032. I think that is strategic. An 8-year deal is longer than what most experts in the industry thought would happen. So I think the fact that the NCAA has lined up the men's and women's tournaments to be up at the same time will be interesting. But yeah, I do think in this deal, at least, women's basketball is sort of what's pushing every other sport forward. But you have other high growth properties, like the women's volleyball championship on an NFL Sunday drew 1.7 million viewers. Like, this is a sport that's on the rise. We've seen what the Nebraska women's volleyball team has done, filling their stadium with fans. And so that's another sport that I think is high growth. And over the next 8 years, again, if these alternative revenue streams can happen, I think volleyball specifically is another sport that would be hugely benefited by that.
Will the NCAA still exist in 8 years? I think that's a question that is not ridiculous.
Right. No, I think that's super fair.
And what does this say to players in their quest to get direct revenue, which I think, again, 8 years is just an incredibly long time span in a sport that's changing every month, much less every year. So we'll see if this deal survives, and we'll see even where we are in 2032. But to focus on 2024 for a second, the sport continues to just make headlines both in the sports world and the culture. Caitlin Clark is soon, barring injury, knock on wood, going to be the all-time leading scorer for men and women. That continues to be one of the biggest stories in sports. I'm interested in going to see her when Iowa plays at Maryland, but I did not buy a ticket in time, so we'll have to look at the secondary market or maybe media credential. But we've also got Juju Watkins, this freshman at USC, who I went to her Instagram to check out the highlights, and the first thing I clicked on was a Wells Fargo ad. So I imagine she's probably doing pretty well for herself, both on the court and off the court. I don't know if you want to start with Caitlin or with Juju, Chantel, but those to me are kind of the two biggest stories so far this year.
Yeah, obviously Caitlin is doing Caitlin Clark type things, logo 3-point shooting, game winners every other day. It's sort of like, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the Big Ten is sort of getting an experience of all of these other teams that don't normally fill their stadium are suddenly realizing like, oh, we need to have extra people here to take tickets, different vendors for food, all of these sort of things that they haven't experienced before that those within Carver Hawkeye Arena do every other day.
Ole Miss just got a record 9,000 fans when LSU came to town. I mean, other schools are experiencing this too.
Exactly. And I think, there's a huge draw for USC, LSU, Iowa, and it's benefiting their conferences. Again, it's sort of like the ripple effect of what these stars, their notoriety, these NIL deals that have put them on larger stages, what it has done. And so, yeah, Caitlin Clark just continues to do Caitlin Clark things. I've heard from so many folks when they do go see her in person where they said, I've seen the highlights, I've seen the 3-point shooting, but what I didn't know was X, sort of what her passes look like, how good of a cutter she is, how she moves on the floor. So I'm curious for your in-person report back on that one. But Juju Watkins is a player that, if we're thinking about Caitlin Clark, this is most likely her last year in college basketball. Juju Watkins is the future of this sport over the next few years. I think if you watch her play, she is just unbelievable, sort of a 3-level scorer. She is so smooth on the floor. I watch her and there aren't many athletes where I need to rewind it sort of every other play because suddenly she's here and then there's 3 defenders and she's on the other side of them and you're wondering exactly how did you fit through there and then finish through contact. She is just really exciting. And I think a lot of times we think of USC as a program because of the athletic department and Cheryl Miller, like, oh, USC, the number 1 player went there. But this is a program that really hasn't been relevant in 30 years. They've won 1 NCAA tournament game in Juju's lifetime. And so she not only has this ability to be this incredible player, but sort of resurrect a women's basketball program that, again, everything is linked, right? Conference realignment. She is going to be someone that's playing in Maryland before you know it because USC is joining the Big Ten.
She also is already in Nike commercials. The LA Times did a long profile of her in which LeBron James said she's the next greatest thing in women's basketball. And James Harden said she can be one of the best women's basketball players to ever touch a basketball. And Paul George said, you name the top female college girls, she should get that same recognition for what she's doing. And honestly, true freshman, she's killing it. You mentioned that she embodies USC's long dormant revival, but UCLA also is at the top of the rankings and looking like one of the best teams in the country. Is there an overall sort of shakeup at the top? Is South Carolina vulnerable? LSU, Iowa, are USC, UCLA, and others actual threats here?
I think the use specifically because of personnel, I think a South Carolina UCLA matchup is going to be super interesting. These 2 teams played last year. Dawn Staley was very complimentary of UCLA last year. They were a very young team. They started several freshmen through the whole season. But then in the offseason, because of the transfer portal, they got a 6'7" transfer from Stanford. And so a lot of teams are having a hard time with South Carolina in the paint, attacking the glass, cleaning up the boards. UCLA kind of can counteract that with Lauren Betts, 6'7" in the post. They're a good rebounding team. So I think that individual matchup would be really interesting. But, again, it's sort of projecting that far into the future. It'll be hard to know exactly what happens 3 months from now. But it does feel like there are, for those people who sort of think of women's basketball still as like a UConn, Tennessee sport, that certainly isn't the case anymore. There are a lot more names, there are a lot more teams, there are a lot more players for the national title this year.
And Chantel, I'm so glad you brought up UConn because they're not even in the top 10 right now. What is going on? What's holding them back? Why are they not at what we have come to expect of UConn over the last, 20, 30 years?
I think the long and one of the big reasons is injuries, which is sadly for a lot of teams. You look at a team like Notre Dame also has had a very injury-riddled season when you look at what a team could be versus what they are. But it's kind of been UConn's story the last few seasons because it's knee injuries sort of, or, different injuries to different players. They're not working with their full complement of the roster right now. And Gino Auriemma has kind of been retooling. I think they've had 7 different lineups through the season so far. Just even recently, Aubrey Griffin, who had sort of emerged as the 6th player for them. You could expect 15 points a game from her. And suddenly it was like, oh, UConn might have a Final Four team if Aubrey Griffin can score, put up 15 and 6 a game. That's pretty good for them. She goes down with an injury. And so they've just had sort of a rotating door of injuries and personnel issues. And Gino Auriemma is starting 2 freshmen in his lineup, which I think he's done a few times in his career. But it's not exactly a huge recipe for success most of the time.
Chantel Jennings is a senior writer at The Athletic. She covers women's college basketball and appears on The Athletic's Women's Basketball podcast. Chantel, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Reboot your credit card with Apple Card. It gives you unlimited daily cash back that can earn 4.35% annual percentage yield when you open a savings account. A high-yield, low-effort way to grow your money with no fees. Apply for Apple Card now in the Wallet app on iPhone to start earning and growing your daily cash with savings today. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, member FDIC. Terms apply.
Now it is time for Afterballs, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says, it was okay. This week, we honor the contributions of one Thomas Burr. Who is Thomas Burr, you might ask? Well, he's maybe one of Michigan's unsung MVPs in this national championship run. As Josh mentioned earlier in the show, Wolverines fans came together after last season to create the One More Year Fund, which was meant to raise enough money to convince its stars to come back for one more year. And it worked. At the One More Year Fund's website today, they wrote, "Thanks to your support, we raised over $135,000 for student athletes. The 2023 campaign is now complete. Check back in 2024. Seems like they probably would have needed more than $135,000 to get everybody to come back. So I don't know what the accounting situation is over there. But anyway, it worked, right? And on their donors list, they have identified Burr as the top donor, the only one at the $10,000 level. So I decided to look up Burr, and I was taken to the Mission Point Press Distribution Services website, where Burr is identified as a, quote, native Michigander and lifelong fishing enthusiast, chasing everything from bluegills and bass to snappers and snook. At 14 years old, he moved to Boca Raton, a place nobody had ever heard of yet, and fell in love with old Florida. Watching progress steal away this magical land also spawned an interest in conservation. I mean, obviously, conservation is big to him. He conserved the college careers of Blake Corum and a bunch of others. Looking up his bio here, it says he went to Miami in Florida, the University of Central Florida, and Michigan. So championship programs, all of them. And he's apparently willing to put his money where his support is. We could all follow from the example of him. And that's where, again, I'd like to mention that you contribute to my own Cash App or Venmo or, yeah, look, even do it with Slate Plus. Maybe you should just give your money to Slate Plus. That's our own little One More Year fund. So,
but wait, before we move on to that, he's a writer and editor. He's written the books The Big Water, A History of Michigan's Lower Osable River, and The Outgoing, a spinner fall thriller. And he has a Prodigy email address. That's definitely the most fascinating thing about him.
Can you believe? I mean, he must be a miracle worker. He's a freelance writer who has an extra $10,000 laying around. So, I mean, imagine that. Imagine that. You got to teach us your ways, Thomas Burr. So, Stefan, who is your Thomas Burr?
Last week in New York, I attended the American Dialect Society's 34th annual Word of the Year vote. More than 300 linguists, lexicographers, and other word-adjacent people like me gathered in a Midtown hotel ballroom and picked winners in 8 individual categories and then the overall Word of the Year, or WOTY. The ceremonies were mastered by Wall Street Journal language columnist and Hang Up and Listen senior lexicographer Ben Zimmer. I'll start with the sad news that despite my vote, Tush Push fell short in the Most Creative Word of the Year category and was not nominated for the overall Word of the Year. It did get support from an eminent linguist, Dennis Preston, who lauded Tush Push for its Yiddish roots, its engaging rhyme, and its quick ubiquity, which I detailed in an Afterball a few weeks ago. Preston also noted the potential for expansion. Pop Warner Leagues, he said, could call it Tushy Pushy, and everyone laughed in the crowd. And then he concluded, I recommend it very highly to overcome the decades-long ignoring of sports terminology by this very Word of the Year event. Preach, Dennis. WOTY is always sports deficient. Preston scoured the archives and found only a handful of WOTY sports nominees over the years. Soccer Mom, Locker Room Banter, Tebowing, Yat Dat, and Who Dat from Josh's New Orleans Saints, and bungee jumping, assuming that is a sport. Preston wrote to the group's New Words Committee. Alas, the ivory tower anti-sports bias continued last week. Tush Push finished third in the most creative category, ahead of only Asholocene, the current era of human history defined by the ubiquity of assholes, and behind Delulu, delusion as in Delulu is the Solulu, delusion is the solution, and the winner of that category, Kenaissance, Renaissance in the wake of the Barbie movie's depiction of Ken, also Kenergy and Knuff. Other group winners included the watermelon emoji used as a symbol of Palestinian solidarity on social media, as political word of the year, let someone cook, as informal word of the year, let Joel cook, let Josh cook, FAFO, fuck around and find out, as acronym/initialism of the year, and stochastic parrot, large language model that can generate plausible synthetic text without having any understanding, as AI-related word of the year. The overall word of the year was enshittification, defined as the worsening of a digital platform through reduction in quality of service, which beat out open parens derogatory, closed parens, parenthetical comment humorously appended after a word that might not be expected to be derogatory. And shittification was coined by the writer Cory Doctorow in a piece in Wired magazine a year ago. Here is how platforms die, he wrote. First, they are good to their users. Then they abuse their users to make things better for their business customers. Finally, they abuse those business customers to claw back all the value for themselves. Then they die. I call this enshittification. Doctorow was writing about Amazon, Facebook, TikTok, etc. But enshittification is everywhere, including sports. Pat McAfee, platforming a narcissistic anti-vax conspiracy theorist and picking fights with his bosses, is the latest embodiment of the enshittification of ESPN. Whether you watched it all the time or not, the cancellation of HBO's Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel, and before that, ESPN's Outside the Lines, also reflected the enshittification of sports TV. University presidents and Power 5 athletic directors, this year the ones who killed the Pac-12, are enshittifying college sports. Multi-sport enshittification via Saudi sports washing is only getting started. FIFA's coming 48-team Men's World Cup will likely enshittify soccer. The NFL's 17th regular season game, enshittifying. Baseball's extra playoff teams, enshittifying. Here's a small but personally annoying example, turning the largely Palestra-based Big Five college basketball round robin in Philadelphia into a faux tournament in the antiseptic arena where the 76ers play, enshittifying. Sometimes change that seems to be part of the enshittification process turns out otherwise. Take, for instance, the pitch clock in baseball, officially the pitch timer, which with Tush Push would be a leading candidate for 2023 Sports Word of the Year. The pitch clock turned out to be not enshittifying at all. The players fucking around on the mound and at the plate for 3 decades was enshittifying. The finding out turned out to be great. Joel, Josh, I mentioned Tush Push and Pitch Clock. I've got a few more candidates for 2023 Sports Word of the Year, but first I want to hear from you.
That 17-game NFL season, I'm so glad that you mentioned the enshittification of that. I just is the cynic here. I mean, I told everybody that more football, it's not good. You don't want to see more football as much as you think you do. So I'm glad that word found its time here because it really seems to have met the moment. So
come on, Joel. The enshittification that has affected your life by far the most is the enshittification of Twitter.
Oh, yeah, man. I don't know, man. What are we going to, I don't know where I'll be next year at this time, but probably not there. But yeah, enshittification, man. It really is the word of the moment, man. And so much in our society has been enshittified.
Good choice. So any Sports Word of the Year nominees?
The Sports Word of the Year is I'm him, like by far and away.
Really? I'm him. I like that. Cook was really good. I really did start using Cook a lot this year too. But I kind of felt like it's been in the mix for maybe 3 years. And so is it like 1 year where it finally sort of meets the moment and then finally breaks through, even though I've been saying Cook for maybe 3 years or something like that? I feel like I've been saying Cook for a while.
The world's generally 3 years behind you. So I think that's about a good equation. But I think when Austin Reeves starts yelling "I'm him" in the playoffs, that means that it's arrived. The white NBA players are saying it.
Yeah. I got some others I wrote down. Michigan Manifesto. Pretty good.
I like that.
Commodio Cordis, the DeMar Hamlin injury.
Oof.
Se acabó. This is over, from the Spanish Women's World Cup backlash against the leader of the Spanish Federation. And Showtime for Otani. SHO-time. I thought those were pretty good.
I like that. Showtime. I mean, man, he's really good. I mean, he's moving like 30 minutes north, and it's just totally. he's being reintroduced to the world. So good for Shohei. That's nice. I like that.
But him getting some recognition for Sports Word of the Year, because he hasn't gotten enough this year.
Is what you're trying to say? He's him.
He's the Austin Reeves of Major League Baseball. So.
That is our show for today. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. To listen to past shows and subscribe or just reach out, go to slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. For Josh Levin and Joel Anderson, I am Stefan Fatsis. Remember Zelmo Beatty and Der Kaiser Franz Beckenbauer, the German soccer legend who died on Monday at age 78. And thanks for listening.